On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who is basically under multiple pressures from people within his own political faction to either restart the war or bring it to an end. And on the other hand, you have the Iranians, who are also under somewhat similar pressures, a public that is weary of war and deprivation, along with hardliners that see that they didn't get exactly what they wanted from the most intense armed phase of the escalation, and they're pushing for a resumption of kinetic activities. So there was another exchange of fire between Iran and the US on Friday. This time the Americans disabled 2 Iranian ships. Meanwhile, the Iranians struck Dubai, and images emerged showing smoke rising from the city's glitzy international airport. I'm Borzu Diragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, but you find it on borzu.substack.com. You can also find me on YouTube and on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe or hit the like button, share if you find it interesting. Turns out also that the UAE might have taken part in a series of U.S. airstrikes on Thursday that targeted Qeshm Island. That's a beautiful resort island as well as a important strategic position along the Persian Gulf. And Bandar Abbas, that's Iran's basically its main port, the country's main port. And also Tehran, the capital, but we're not sure exactly what they struck in the capital. Now, Iran can't reach the U.S. bases and aircraft carriers that are launching these airstrikes and the fighter jets and helicopters that have hit Iranian targets. So it targets the Gulf states instead, especially the United Arab Emirates, which Iran sees as an extension of the U.S. and Israel. And there's some reason for its decision to view the UAE in that particular way, particularly in the way that the leadership of the UAE, perhaps even against some of the other elements in the country. It's a country of 7 little monarchic mini-states led by Abu Dhabi, but there are signs that not even everyone in the UAE agrees with this direction that the UAE has taken in doubling down on its relationship with Israel and the US. Despite all of this fighting, it really does seem that both the US and Iran are genuinely keen on not getting back into the ferocious days of the 40-day war, like the most severe fighting. None of the attacks appear to have caused a lot of damage, although we're not exactly sure. And there's no huge reports of casualties. Hard to find anything from the Iranian side. And the Americans, of course, they deny that anything was damaged or that there were any casualties. And it's really important to note that both countries are under quite a bit of both domestic and international pressure to avoid returning to a war. And if you listen to the following interview, I kind of explain a little bit why there is this pressure and why we are sort of on this precipice of a really dangerous escalation if the war continues. I spoke just very recently with the South Era Networks, and it was a pretty good and interesting interview, not as short and choppy. The questions from the interviewer were excellent. Have a listen or watch.
Are we watching the beginning of a real de-escalation situation between the US and Iran, or do you think the region is moving into a different, more unpredictable phase of the conflict?
I think we are definitely in a more unpredictable phase in general in the Middle East. It does appear that Donald Trump, who started this war, and war wouldn't have happened without him, even if Bibi Netanyahu wanted it, is looking for some kind of de-escalation. Now, it's not clear why he wants that de-escalation. Is it because he is looking to actually end the conflict, maybe perhaps somewhere in his reptile mind realizes that it was a mistake? Or is he just trying to calm things down because of what's happening next week, which is his big trip to Beijing? He doesn't want to be showing up in Beijing while this war is raging. He also doesn't want to be showing up in Beijing while this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is continuing, because it puts him in a weak position. He's showing up there. Xi will be like, what did you do to the world economy? And because China is being affected very much by this, Asian countries are being affected very much by this. And he doesn't want to look weak as he arrives in Beijing next week.
Well, with that in mind, though, Israel has struck Beirut for the first time since the ceasefire
Yeah.
here. So, how much pressure does that put on the broader Iran truce? How much pressure does that put on Netanyahu and overall with the ongoing conflict?
I mean, you can see from social media that the Israeli advocates are really nervous about even the rumor of a deal, this proposal that was reported on by Axios and
Mm,
Dropsite News as well, this memorandum of understanding that's being
mm.
considered by the Iranians. I think they're nervous, and I think that more likely than not, Israel is trying to be the spoiler, trying to provoke the Iranians. The Iranians made some sort of cessation of hostilities. There hasn't been really a cessation of hostilities. Some sort of cessation of hostilities, part of their agreement for the ceasefire with the United States. And so the fact that the Israelis are choosing now to escalate in Israel is probably an attempt to scuttle those rumors of an impending peace.
Okay, so with President Trump now saying that the deal could happen quickly, he said this yesterday. From what you're hearing, do you think that this is realistic? Do you think this is what's really going to be happening here during the next few days, or
Oh,
not?
I think there's a preliminary deal that could be arrived at very quickly. It's just
Yeah,
not one that Trump will go for because it looks a lot like the one that he tore up in 2018, that
yeah,
nuclear deal. So I think that that is his dilemma right now. He doesn't want to be seen as signing the nuclear deal 2.0, which allows Iran to continue some token enrichment on its soil, which gives Iran certain nuclear rights in exchange for sanctions relief and unfreezing of funds. So he's in a tough situation because he's got, on the one hand, the entire world saying, look, end this thing. And then he has his donors and golf buddies saying that if you end it in a way that makes you look bad, that's
right.
going to really hurt you politically and it's going to hurt your reputation and it's going to hurt his primary financier, that is Israeli interests in the United States.
Of course, and then it could potentially hurt the midterms here that are coming up at the end of the year in the United States.
No,
Now,
but
with Iranian
actually, I,
officials,
I think it could. I think it could help the midterms. I think that a lot of Republicans, if he did this, it would
okay,
improve the prospects. A lot of Republicans don't want this. This is weird. It's not politically advantageous for him to do this. It's not helping him with the voters. So it's like strictly something having to do with his donors.
right. Now, Iranian officials are calling the current proposal an American wish list, right? What would a deal actually need to include for Tehran to take this seriously and then for both sides to come to a final agreement?
Well, for one thing, Trump would have to stop making outlandish remarks like, we're going to bomb them to hell, we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age. That kind of talk, if that cools down, that'll help a lot. And weirdly, even the Iranian officials are coming out and being like, hey, look, we know that this is just bluster, but this bluster is not helpful because we're dealing
Right.
with our hardliners here and you're giving them red meat as well. So cool it with the blustery rhetoric. We don't believe you anymore. It doesn't serve any purpose. So that would be one thing. The other thing would be to allow Iran to have a little bit of enrichment on its soil, allow it to enrich up to 3 point something percent. If they want to take Iran's massive enriched uranium stockpile away, it will not go to the United States. It will go to another country like Russia, and not even France. It will go to Russia. And that's something that they would have to agree with. And then the two other major things, ballistic missiles, proxies,
Right.
those are off the table. No talk about disarming Hezbollah, no talk about disarming the Houthis, no talk about the Iraqi militias, and no talk at all about limiting its ballistic missile capabilities. That would even be politically unpopular in Iran right now because of the role those missiles played in the recent war.
Now, when it comes to South Asia, where energy prices, shipping routes, and millions of expat workers are connected to the Gulf specifically, what could the consequences be if this ceasefire ends up falling apart?
I mean, if it turns into an escalatory confrontation, if we
Mhm.
pick up where we left off when the war ended, that could be cataclysmic for the world economy. Because if viewers recall, it was right at the moment when the US was threatening to hit all of Iran's energy installations and critical civilian infrastructure. And Iran, in turn, responded that it would hit the Gulf energy infrastructure as well
Right.
as desalination plants and energy infrastructure in Israel. And that could just take so much gas and oil and other crucial molecules offline for years to come. And that we're talking about a really cataclysmic event, not just for South Asia, not just for the global South, though they'll be hurt the most because they're the most vulnerable to these prices.
Right.
But for the entire world, we're talking about a years-long depression.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining
It's
us,
been a
Bursa.
pleasure.
We really appreciate your time.
The war has also stripped bare many of the illusions that people had about the global world order. This is a crisis that was caused by the West, specifically the US, but also Europe in its coddling of both the US and Israel and its enabling of their worst instincts. And basically allowing Donald Trump to get away with so much that he eventually felt that he could do whatever he wants. It was, if you recall, the Europeans who were like celebrating when Donald Trump toppled Nicolas Maduro and kidnapped him in Venezuela earlier this year. This just totally blatant violation of international law and diplomatic norms, kidnapping the guy and bringing him to a jail cell in Brooklyn, New York. This was really damaging to the idea of international law and international norms. And Europeans cheered him on. So they were basically enabling him. Now he launched this war. Basically, he started planning for this war just days, it seems, after that Venezuela event. And the world is being really badly affected by this conflict. And it's causing profound damage to the global economy. But it's largely being diffused by the countries of Eurasia, that is China and Russia, and the global South. And that includes Pakistan and China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Turkey. These are the countries that are stepping up to try to diffuse this conflict. And meanwhile, the UN is nowhere to be found. Have you heard anything from the UN? They make statements, but they're not really, because of their wishy-washiness and profound subservience to the West, they're not really playing an interesting role in this. And meanwhile, Europe is even more pathetic, except perhaps for a few countries. They originally supported the war, except for Spain and later Italy. They were really kind of keen on this plan of toppling the Iranian regime once and for all. Now they're essentially not doing anything except issuing these lame statements that are just made fun of on social media. Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, he keeps fumbling with his comments. I make fun of him on Twitter. Everyone else makes fun of him on Twitter. He's become instead of becoming a world leader, he's basically a global punching bag. In any case, I spoke about the geopolitical changes that this war has wrought in an interview with India's NewsX World.
U.S. President Donald Trump insisted the ceasefire remains intact despite the exchange of fire. However, regional diplomats have warned that this escalation could derail peace talks and further shake global energy markets. And now joining us live to tell us more is Borzu Daragahi, Iranian-American journalist and founder of the Badlands newsletter. As we head closer into the weekend and into Sunday, what more can we expect from this situation, please?
Well, it's like you said, it's very volatile. I think that both sides, both Iran and the U.S., are somewhat committed to maintaining some semblance of a ceasefire, but there are other interests. There was a mention of the United Arab Emirates, Israel as well, that are really unhappy with the status quo. I think a lot of people around the world are unhappy with the status quo. That this blockade, this closing of the Strait of Hormuz, the rising prices, there's a lot of frustration on the part of certain interests in Washington as well that they didn't get the war that they were promised, because it looks like a few of the U.S. original goals are going to be met. And so there is a lot of pressure both ways. On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who is basically under multiple pressures from people within his own political faction to either restart the war or bring it to an end. And on the other hand, you have the Iranians, who are also under somewhat similar pressures, a public that is weary of war and deprivation, along with hardliners that see that they didn't get exactly what they wanted from the most intense armed phase of the escalation, and they're pushing for a resumption of kinetic activities.
Keir Starmer mentioned that there wasn't a strong enough navy to block Russian ships going through to support Russian and Ukraine conflicts. Now, with that being said, if London down the line in 2 to 3 months decides to get involved, do you believe that that will help appease the situation, or will it only add to the existing tension? What are your thoughts, Mr. Daragahi?
Well, first of all, I'm in Paris, not in London. I was in London last week, but it's on the other side of the English Channel. So I'll put it in a way of getting European countries involved in this. Look, Europe kind of leveraged itself out of this whole issue. They were so, at the beginning of the war, they were so on the side of the U.S. They were basically, you had Germany saying that Israel and America are doing the West's dirty work in this war. That was highly inflammatory and toxic to the Iranians. They've sanctioned themselves out of relevance in terms of Iran. They don't have any economic relations with Iran at this point, and Iran doesn't care what they have to say. And anyone who's been watching the news lately can see what Donald Trump thinks of them, the contempt that he holds for them, the way he talks about Europe, the way he talks about the UK, France, and Germany, the insults, the nasty remarks about NATO, the bullying, the coaxing, and so on. So I don't think they have a lot of influence. I think that that there's no role that is positive that they could play at this point. They've really fumbled the ball. If you think about the great European diplomats of the past and the great European diplomatic accomplishments, really you have a very weak team. Meanwhile, you have these rising powers such as China, India, Russia, Pakistan as well, these other countries that have been playing Saudi Arabia even playing a diplomatic role. Turkey, we have to add, Oman, they've been playing a role in bringing the parties to the negotiating table, as Europe has just been fumbling and looking like a bunch of fools.
Yes, sir. Essentially, when it comes down to the situation, for those that might not be aware, how do you essentially let them know what's happening? How do we essentially put this into context for somebody who may not be watching the news every day and may not have a say in government or politics or is not a news anchor? How do we essentially contextualize this?
Well, I think you have big political years in many countries right now, including in certain Western countries such as the United States and France. And I think that politicians of the opposition will make the case for for you, so to speak. For example, in the United States right now, you have many people who are blaming Trump for this, not the Iranians, or nature for the price rises. They're not blaming just plain old inflation. There's a lot of understanding that the prices that are rising are because of that. But in countries that are less freedom of speech, so to speak, it becomes difficult. And there's a lot of people who are confused. Why is the price of everything going up? Why is it harder and harder every day, every week for me to make ends meet with the salary that I'm getting? And there's a lot of frustration. And I don't know, really, frankly, what people outside of the United States and Iran can do about that. You know, because you have these two parties that are locked in this confrontation, dragging everyone else in the world in on them. I think that people have a right to be angry, and they should be angry not just at the United States and Iran, but the global system for really failing them, and their own elites for failing to prevent this, being part of it in their own way.
I am Borzu Daragahi. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the podcast. Some people have said they would like me to do some more writing. I would love to as well. It's just I have so many little writing projects that I'm working on. It's hard to get them all done. And resources are a little bit of a problem. I don't have a lot of time, and I need to do stuff that actually makes money. So if you could consider becoming a paying subscriber, you go to borzu.substack.com and you upgrade your subscription to a paid subscription. If you can't do that, you can't afford it, you don't want to, that's cool. At least consider subscribing to my podcast on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or just subscribe on YouTube. Hit the like button, share. That's also very kind. Again, thank you for listening or watching.